I did something today that I did not want to do, but I knew I had to do it. I watched all of the video released yesterday showing what the police were doing in the hallway of Robb Elementary School after a mass murderer fired his mass murder weapon in 2 classrooms. Now, I would not have gotten through that video. I would not have gotten through the first few minutes of that video if there had not been a very, very important sound edit in that video that made it possible to watch it and listen to it. I'll explain that later as I describe this video. The video does not show any children or teachers at all, except for one child, very, very briefly, one child who steps into the other end of the hallway, far away from the shooter. And when the child sees the man with the gun, the child turns around and runs back and hides in a bathroom where that boy remained safely for over an hour until the police finally killed the mass murderer. We first saw still images from this same video camera weeks ago, images of police officers standing close to the camera at one end of the hallway and as far away from the murderer in the classroom as possible. So, from an actual evidence standpoint, we really learn nothing in this video, nothing about the case. There is really no reason for you to watch it. It shows you what you already know, that after an initial attempt to confront the mass murderer, the police did essentially nothing for 77 minutes. That's what this video shows and proves, and we already knew that. You already knew that. The most horrific thing we see and hear on this video is the moment when the murderer begins firing his assault weapon into the first classroom from the hallway, because the camera only shows what happens in the hallway. And because the murderer is as far away from the camera as possible at that point at the other end of the hallway, we see in the distance the first firing of that assault weapon while he then steps into the classroom. We hear about a dozen bullets fired in about 1 second, maybe a second and a half, as he steps into the classroom and disappears for the rest of the video. And then we hear what could be at least 100 bullets fired over about 3 minutes with several pauses that are several seconds long. And at each pause, you think and you hope and you really think that the shooting is now over. And then it starts again. What the video lets you feel, which news reporting like this cannot, is the passage of time. When we read the words 3 minutes in a news account, it's not the same as experiencing those 3 minutes, especially if it's 3 minutes of gunfire from a mass murderer using an AR-15 in an elementary school. It is an agonizingly long 3 minutes. The video begins when the shooter is still outside the school. He fires his weapon outside the school, which gets the attention of a teacher who calls 911 before the murderer enters the building. The terror in that teacher's voice on the phone to 911, and as she screams at her students while she's still on the phone to 911, screaming to them to get in the classroom and hide, that is the sound of what it feels like when you see a fully equipped American mass murderer approaching your school. It is a sound unlike any other the human voice can produce. It is one of the reasons why you should not watch this video. You will never forget that teacher's voice. From the second the teacher's 911 call ends, you wait for the police to arrive as you then watch the murderer enter the school. The police arrive 4 minutes and 20 seconds after the 911 call, and it feels like an hour when you're watching that video. The police arrive 3 minutes after the murderer started shooting. The murderer is still firing his assault weapon in the classroom when two police officers come running into the hallway, and to their full credit, at that moment, they run straight to the sound of the gunfire, straight to it. They crouch outside the classroom for almost a minute before the murderer realizes that they are there and fires at them, and then they run back down that hallway in retreat even faster than they ran before. And that was the end of the police attempt to save the teachers and children in that classroom for the next 77 minutes. During most of those 77 minutes, the police stay far away from the classroom where they know the gunman is. And as the crowd of police officers grows and grows in that hallway to include state and federal and local badges, no one appears ever to be in command or in control of any of the police officers in and around the school. Some police body cam video shows one state police official walking around outside the school nonstop, appearing to possibly be a command level officer, and he's on the phone the entire time. Surely talking about what's happening in the school and trying to figure out what to do, or trying to figure out what more resources they can get. No police officers are seen using police radios. There is not a single police officer on the video who ever appears to know what to do. Not one. They kept the hallway empty for almost the entire time. From as far a distance as possible, they aimed rifles at the doorway of the classroom in the hope that the murderer would walk out of the classroom. That appears to be the plan for most of the time, if you can call that a plan. Here is a still image from the video showing the empty corridor and the heavily armed police aiming at the classroom door. This has been called the picture of police incompetence. Law enforcement professionals have been unanimously critical of the police with shields and high-powered weapons waiting 77 minutes before entering the classroom. And yes, this is a total failure of police training, but it is also a picture of fear. Those police officers are not at all afraid of the murderer. They are deathly afraid of his weapon. They are afraid of going through a classroom door to face an AR-15. They all know what that weapon can do to them. The AR-15 doesn't just kill them. It can dismember them. In the process of killing them, it can leave their faces unrecognizable. They all know that. The first officers who ran down the hallway toward the sound of the gun were carrying handguns. And as soon as they heard the weapon firing, they knew what they were up against. And when they thought it was being fired at them, they ran away from that AR-15 as fast as they possibly could. They ran away from an AR-15 with high-capacity magazines capable of firing hundreds of bullets. If the murderer had a handgun, those police officers with the shield and the high-powered rifles would have taken their chances going through that classroom door, but the AR-15 kept them out in fear. American law enforcement does not know how to fight the AR-15, and that is not the fault of American police officers. They should not be facing AR-15s. The AR-15 was designed for soldiers in combat. So were some of the uniforms worn by police officers in the hallway. They were dressed for war, but they were not willing to go to war against an AR-15 in a classroom. As time passed in the hallway, the police became more confident in their safety to move closer to the classroom. And at that point, no one was controlling access to the hallway. Officers walked in and out of the hallway as they pleased. They appeared very busy talking to each other, but they did nothing. Now, as you watch these highly armed, heavily trained officers not having any idea what to do about a mass murderer with an AR-15 in a classroom, consider the Republican solution to school shootings like this, which is teachers with guns. Imagine, instead of the people you see in the hallway on that video, imagine that that hallway is filled with teachers with guns. They wouldn't be dressed like that. They wouldn't have combat-style camouflage uniforms. They wouldn't have 1% of the training of those police officers have. But Republicans like Senator Rafael Cruz, who represents the state where that shooting happened, believe that the solution is to fill that hallway with teachers with guns. Highly trained police in combat uniforms with shields and assault weapons and body armor cannot handle a school shooter with an AR-15, but Republicans think teachers can go up against the next AR-15 that comes into an American school, and we know it's going to be an AR-15. We know that is the favorite weapon of America's mass murderers. In the 77 minutes when the police in the hallway were busy talking to each other, in the classrooms, children and teachers were bleeding to death.
He went to the other classroom, and then there's a door between our classrooms, and he went to there and shot my teacher and told my teacher goodnight and shot her in the head. And then he shot some of my classmates and the whiteboard. When I went to the barracks, he shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and I put it all over me. And
what did you do then when you put the blood on yourself?
Just stay quiet, and then I got my teacher's phone and called 911.
And what did you tell 911?
I told her that we need help.
After everything, I get more angry because you have a bulletproof vest. I had nothing. I had nothing. You're supposed to protect and serve. There is no excuse for their actions, and I will never forgive them. I will never forgive them.
How many students were in your classroom when the shooter came in?
11 students.
So the shooter killed every single student in your classroom.
Yes, ma'am. I lost 11 that day. And I just went to my parents and said, I'm sorry. I tried my best. With what I was told to do. Please don't be angry with me.
We have only shown the sections of the video of the school that day in the hallway that include images that we have already seen before from that camera. Many of the families of the victims of the mass murder have objected to the release of the full video by the Austin American-Statesman. I saw no reason to show the new parts of the video that disturbed the families the most, even before the families objected to it. The Austin American-Statesman has defended publishing the full video on its website, saying that they did so only after, quote, long and thoughtful discussions and after so much evasion from local officials about what actually happened in the school. The Statesman said, our goal is to continue to bring to light what happened at Robb Elementary. But even while trying to deliver full transparency of what happened inside the school, the Austin American-Statesman still decided to edit the video in two important ways. One is the blurring of that one child's face on the video, the child who sees the murderer open fire from the other end of the hall. And the other edit, for the sensitivity of not just the families of the victims, but for all of us, is an audio edit that repeatedly flashes in a corner of the screen while the mass murderer is firing his AR-15. In the classroom. And this is the edit that I needed. I couldn't have watched this video without this edit. And when we hear the sound of the gun, The corner of the screen carries the written message, "The sound of children screaming has been removed."